This evening and tomorrow. If you need anything, I am your point guy. So thank you for coming. I'm glad to see new faces and a lot of old faces from the Be My App family here. And I'm just going to go straight in. We've got technical presentations coming up from Intel. And we do have a Twitter hashtag. It is hashtag TizenSV. And we will be watching you. So if you have questions, comments, or complaints, please put them there. Let's see if there's anything else. Like I said earlier, we are videoing this. It is just for our internal promotional purposes. A little bit for Intel. It'll probably just go up on our blog and our YouTube. If there's any other purpose that we'll use for this video, we'll let you know. And then tomorrow when we do video check-ins, if you're on a team, we will ask you to sign video releases. We just want to keep that on the up and up and be really transparent with you. Can you hear me now? Can everyone hear me? I heard a speak up. Okay. But we're going to be really transparent about the purposes of the video, and we will have a release for you to sign tomorrow. Let's see if there's anything else I have for you. Pizza's coming in a little while. It'll be at a break in between presentations. And there are vegetarian options available, so if you are a vegetarian, we have got you well taken care of. All through the hack, don't worry. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to Wesley Osaze from Intel, and he will talk about the Tizen App Challenge, among other things.
Okay. All right, just wanted to talk about the Tizen App Challenge. If you have not heard about it, the Tizen App Challenge is $4 million that we are putting up so for the winners to submit their apps for a chance to win up to $4 million is what is being offered. There's non-game and game categories. And there's different categories that are available. If you go to the Tizen.org website, you will see a link for the Tizen App Challenge there with all the rules and regulations there. So currently, the App Challenge will go through November 1st, so you have to have your apps submitted and certified before November 1st in order to be considered in the App Challenge. Okay, so you can register for the App Challenge, submit your apps that you have created here this weekend, and we look forward to seeing those. For you repeat comers, if you have not submitted your previous apps to the App Challenge, we suggest that you do so, and continue to create new apps. Continue to upload more apps to the App Store, and be on the lookout for our future events. We will be having this event in New York and in Seattle also this year. So if you have friends, coworkers, please get the word out that we will be holding additional hackathons throughout the nation and throughout the world.
We got HTML5 Developer Conference. We're doing one there too.
HTML5 Developer Conference later in October. We'll also have a hackathon there as well. Okay? All right. Any questions in regards to the Tizen App Challenge? Once again, you can go to the Tizen.org website, and it'll give you a link to the Tizen App Challenge with more detail. Okay? Thank you.
And so just really quickly, we'll have two technical presentations. The first one will cover the native APIs for Tizen, and the second one will cover the web APIs. So we'll have Hot from Samsung.
First technical challenge here is how I can do this without holding on to this thing the whole time.
As a heavier.
Yeah. Okay, it's entertaining what I think they believe yours are with this Can people hear me? I can't really tell whether it's coming through on the microphone.
Yep.
Okay, great. So hi, my name is Greeley. I am, strangely enough, Director of Developer Relations for Samsung here in North America. And yet they still let me out to talk once in a while. So I'm going to talk today about native app development for Tizen. Quick question, how many people here develop for Android or are used to Eclipse and such? About a third, okay. Who's never seen like Eclipse before? Okay, all right, so I'll run through that part relatively quickly. So quick overview of the talk. I'll talk about the Tizen SDK, go through some typical app creation. I'm going to dance around and make your life really difficult though. Walk through kind of hello world. So then I want to try and get to that actually relatively quickly so I can show you walking through some code. And then talk just a little bit about debugging and then some key tips that can help you save at least a few hours, possibly. Okay, so Tizen SDK. So version 2.2 is out for people who didn't know that. So purpose of my question, I think, is kind of obvious at this point, that Tizen is actually built, the Tizen SDK, the IDE, is built as a plugin for Eclipse. So if you're used to Eclipse, you'll be used to seeing a lot of the kind of standard elements here. So a couple things I'll point out. I mean, you've got your Project Explorer, and this is just a default layout that you use, your main editing window. And then there's all sorts of extra panels, special purpose panels and stuff. And two of the ones that actually come with Tizen that are interesting, actually three that I'll talk about briefly, that you don't find in other projects. There's Tizen comes with an event injector, so for people who've ever tried to debug or do things like on Android, it's like trying to actually feed events or test something, especially like you're talking about GPS who wants to, wander around with your car and your laptop hooked up. And, so Tizen has this really neat utility built in to help you test with some of that stuff. So there's a special purpose panel for that. There's the code snippet panel, which there's just actually a small handful of kind of standard code templates. It's especially useful for, and I'll talk a little bit more later about how Tizen doesn't support. Tizen's a C++ native development environment, but it doesn't support exception handling, and so there's actually kind of macros to simulate that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And so if you want to find out easily kind of how to add those, you can look at the code snippet piece. And then there's the Connection Explorer, and I'll talk about that more right now. Okay, so like any good modern development environment, I think pretty much what people expect these days, you've got Tizen comes with an emulator that you can run. As you probably know, there are actually no Tizen devices that are actually out shipping yet, so for the time being, this is what you're going to be using, most likely. I think some people, how many people actually went to the Tizen conference, either of the two Tizen conferences? One, I recognize you from that. Yeah. In fact, I think you were the previous one. Okay, a couple people. So, so some of you might have seen some of the early lunchbox devices. So there are kind of prototype devices out, but they're not that easy to get your hands on. So, and then the Connection Explorer panel. So this is a panel that you'll by default find in the lower left corner, and this is going to show you where you can actually go to start up an emulator and actually explore the file system on here. And one neat little thing, I don't know if you can read, you probably can't read this from far away, but you can kind of recognize some of the underlying technology from Tizen if you're familiar with Linux, because you'll see that the file system that you see on the Tizen device bears a strong resemblance to a lot of the, it's got a lot of the standard Linux file system layout in there. So it's always fun to go and poke around in there and see how things are structured. So along with the emulator, you have the emulator manager. So this is where you're going to create your virtual devices. It's really straightforward. Right now, there's actually 2 resolutions to pick from. So, it's a typical thing. You're going to bring it up. The manager, you're going to be able to define a lot of these things. We'll fill in sort of defaults, and you can define things like your memory size for the device. Your resolution, you can get into more complicated things with base images and stuff, but I don't want to get into that. So just to get started, you're just going to go to the standard Tizen 2.2 tab here, and hit plus to create a new emulator. I've only got 2 set up here because there's only 2 resolutions, and that's kind of all I've cared about. I haven't played much with concerns with memory and such. So just to give an idea of the layout, so when you create a project, this is what you're going to see in terms of the file layout. If you actually go into command line and explore your workspace, you'll see folders that correspond to all of these elements. So it is, like I said, it's C++ based, so you're going to have a source directory with your C++ or C files, an Inc directory where you're going to have your header files. Then you've also got your application storage resource files where you're going to have images, audio, UI layout, things like that. All that's pretty straightforward. The project binaries, this is actually going to be automatically created when you build your project. So when you first create it and it's not there, don't be surprised. It'll actually be generated automatically. And so, of course, anything that's generated automatically, you don't really want to mess around in there. And then, of course, you've got your manifest XML file, which is a pretty typical file that basically is going to have information about the application. I'll talk about a little bit more. And actually, one more thing is that you can actually build shared libraries. So again, this is Linux underlying, so you have a lot of those capabilities there that you'd expect with Linux, including things like shared object libraries. Okay, so let's talk about getting going with creating a typical application. So here when I'm talking about a typical application, I'm not actually going to talk about something like a game application where you might want to be doing all of your rendering over full frame. So this is more something like just another type of application where you have controls and standard navigation and such. And one of the things that's really, I think, kind of impressive and nice about Tizen is that it actually makes a lot of this stuff really easy. They thought a fair amount about kind of typical UI paradigms for mobile, and a lot of that you can see reflected in the Tizen framework and how you use it. And so a lot of this stuff can actually be set. You can actually do a lot without even touching code. In particular, the standard UI framework is you have a very top-level container called a frame. Again, a frame was, you would use just a frame if you were going to do something like a game where you're going to render straight to that and not worry about things like transitions between scenes and such. Otherwise, normally you're going to have another high-level container that's full screen called the form. And within that form, you're going to have your controls. So of course you have the standard array of controls that you'd expect. And then there's things, automatic support for things like an indicator bar and a header and footer. And a lot of these things are stuff that you can set up entirely with properties, and I'll show you that when we do the sample application. And then your standard Tizen UI is actually built around transitioning between different forms. So we'll talk a bit about how that works. So relating to that, this is really a key class, and this is what supports your basic navigation paradigm. So the idea is that your kind of core main single view in an application, and again, this being just targeted primarily toward mobile, where you've got typically a single UI block that's built around a specific purpose, and then you're transitioning to a completely new UI as you move around in your application. And so that's going to be supported by this scene manager class, and in particular, navigation using these go forward and go backwards methods. And so I'll show in detail how you would go use those, but as kind of illustrated here, so I have like my initial, this would be my main form when I start up the app, and I've got a simple button here that's, I would click, and that would transition me to a second form. And then I might tie that button to actually go use the go backward, or actually navigate onto another scene or something like that. So basically, that bottom line is you've got two scenes here, and we're going to show how you hook up event listeners to actually make your calls to go forward and go backward to do your navigation between your scenes. This is actually another nice feature of Tizen, which is an actual WYSIWYG UI builder for the native applications. And this is actually a pretty nice full-featured UI builder. I've seen, a lot of UI builders, you get out and you try them out, and they sort of get you about 10% of the way there, and then you're like, now what? And, then you go off and code everything by hand, which you would have. Anyway, but this is actually a really nice kind of drag and drop. You can create new forms, and I'll actually show how you go beyond that to use to actually design out your workflow, so the flow between the different scenes that you're going to use in your application. And then once again, this has become, I think, just sort of XML is great at this, and people have recognized the value of doing it this way. So you end up with for each form that you're constructing, you end up with a corresponding XML file that's actually going to be what gets handed automatically to the system to inflate, to render your scene. And so actually you can do that by hand, or you can, we'll see how the system basically will take care of all of the stuff for you. So everything I'm showing you here, you can actually do programmatically. You can create, any UI element you want. You can create forms that you want. All of that stuff can be done programmatically. But a lot of the times, you'll just actually let the system take care of it for you. So in the UI builder, one of the things that's going to be key is adding event handlers. Most commonly, you've got an action event listener. And so the simple thing is that in the UI builder, you just right-click on an object like the button. It'll come up with something that asks you if you want, one of the entries in the menu will be the add event handler entry. Click on that, you're going to get this dialog box that's going to pop up. And you'll see by default it actually asks you if you want to fill in an action listener, because that is really the most common thing that you end up doing. One thing that I have to admit that I'm not that thrilled with Tizen, its current stage, of course it's under development, is this action ID. So the basic idea is that your action listener, you're going to associate with a particular event an action ID. That's going to go into your event listener, and then you'll make decisions on exactly what to do in the event listener based on the action ID that's passed in. And that action ID just has to be a simple number. You can't use a string or anything, so when you get in there and you try and type something, it's not a number, nothing's going to show up, and you're going to be frustrated. So just remember that it has to be something. And so that's one thing I think is, like, mentally you kind of want to map out. It's just going to help you avoid problems if you kind of have an idea of, like, assigning some number range to certain types of objects or something like that, so you can keep a little consistency in there. So this is the workflow designer. So you actually get into the workflow designer. When you're in the UI builder, you'll see over on the side here, and I'll actually show in the example creating a new form and how easy it is to do it in here, and then just clicking on that guy to bring up the workflow designer. And this is going to be where you can actually tie together your scenes. And so what you can see here, you've got this kind of special purpose one, which is the application start, and that's just tying and showing you where, when you have to start your application, which form it's going to bring up as your main entry scene. And then from there, you can actually just graphically tie together different scenes. So I can actually drag out new forms on here, drop them down here, and tie them together with my flow. And this gets into, again, the forward and backward navigation. So right here I've got a forward navigation from the main scene to the secondary scene. And then the one that's highlighted right now is the one whose properties are up, is showing backward navigation to this scene. And it's probably too small for you to see, but there's actually a direction property here that's where it's selected backward navigation. And so that's going to, when we see it in the code, it's actually going to automatically fill in the right method calls for you. So again, this is kind of highlighting these resources that you have over here, and I'll show you the creation of the forms, and that's where you're going to be dragging things out and dropping them on. And then the properties I was talking about. This is called getting ahead of your animations.
Could you speak louder, please?
I can try. There was a lot of buzzing coming from the mic, so I didn't want to yell into it too much. But. Okay, so is that better? That's yep. Better. Yay. All right, so just kind of walking through some of the steps. I think I'm breathing it. I'm going to sound like I'm breathing heavily here. So one stickler, this is one of these things that I'm just going to point out that you have to do basically once, and if you forget about it, you're going to be frustrated. And so I'm going to make hand waving motion so that you remember this piece. Application signing, if you try and build an application before you generate your signing certificate, it's going to gripe at you about not having that, and it's not going to do anything. So one of the key things that you're going to want to do when you just first set up your environment is actually to generate your signing certificate. The way you do that is depends on whether you're in Mac or Windows, but basically you want to get to the Preferences menu. Under that, you're going to find the Tizen SDK, and then this thing called the Security Profiles. And so you can see, when I bring up my preferences, it's going to give me, it's got preferences for a gazillion things that have to do with Eclipse. But then you find down here the Tizen SDK piece, and then you go to Security Profiles, and you're going to wind up seeing this this dialog. And really the key thing here is to generate your certificate, and I'll actually walk through this really quickly just to show what it is. And really, the only confusing thing about this that I found is that it asked me for a key file, and I wasn't sure whether I was supposed to have generated the key file that it was going to incorporate, or whether it was going to do it automatically. It turns out it does it automatically for you. So you'll hit generate. There's just a couple things to fill in for people that are used to signing certificate. There's all sorts of extra information you can fill in if you want, but you don't really need to worry about that. So I spent way too long on that, but like I said, you'll want to remember it. Okay. Another nice thing, creating a native project. So there's actually a project creation wizard. And so this is how you're going to typically want to go ahead and start your projects, is by going into File, Native Project, Tizen Native Project. And it's going to bring up this dialog. And what I'm showing here actually is there's a number of types of projects to select from with the basic templates. What I'm not showing here, which is really nice, is actually, if you click over on this, you'll find that there's a huge number of sample applications that come built into the IDE that you can select from. And we'll actually take a look at some of them, because there's some really interesting ones. There's a fun one that I'll show you a little bit later. So, but to get started with your basic project, you're going to want to start out creating a form-based project, and then you have a choice over here of whether it's going to be using the scene manager or not with a scene manager. Typically, you're going to use one with a scene manager. So all you need is a couple of clicks there, and to give your project a name, and then you don't actually have to do anything beyond that. There's some other stuff you can specify if you want, but you don't typically need to, so you just finish off, and it'll just create all of that boilerplate framework for you. The manifest file, really the most important thing with the manifest file is actually the privilege, assigning privileges. So I think people are used to now kind of seeing, the restrictions, kind of security question.
Windows 8 doesn't have that kind of UI. Windows 8?
Windows 8?
Yeah.
This is all based off of my Mac, so it doesn't look like, but it should, it should look relatively the same.
It doesn't show how the Explorer or anything.
Doesn't what?
Any Explorer or anything. It has a different view.
The default view for Eclipse, or
Yeah, it's called an XDK. XDK.
okay, I'll take a look at it
Okay.
after this. So basically, the Tizen security model that you don't want people to do things like use data when the user's not expecting it. So there's certain privileged APIs that you're basically, the way it enforces things is that you actually can't call the API unless you specifically assign the privilege in the manifest file. So basically, when you go in to edit the manifest file, it's going to bring up this kind of special view in the editor to allow you to do things like set the privileges. And so when you're looking at the documentation for stuff, and it'll note when something's a privileged API, and then you're going to want to make sure to follow up by going in and selecting to allow that. And then this is actually slightly old. So it used to be that you have to set to build your project, you would set up a build configuration right now, but just by default, you can just use the default build. And then there's one thing that you can either love or hate about Eclipse is that there's about 3 ways to get to any one menu entry. I usually just go over to the Project Explorer and right-click on stuff there, and you select to build your project, and then that's also where you find the run as, and run it as a Tizen native application. So that's how you're going to build and launch your application once you've started it. Okay, so that was a really quick run through. Question? These slides, I don't know if they're going to be posted. They're not actually available at Tizen.org. They, I think, are, well, a similar set is available from the LinuxCon conference that was available, but I don't know if these are going to be posted or not. But,
Can we put them on Dropbox?
yeah, I can send them. So, yeah, okay, so they'll be made available. And you asked that right before I'm about to get out of the slides. So. Okay, so this is fun. All right, so I tried to expand this a bit so you can see a little bit of the code. Well, I don't know if people are going to be able to see very well from back there, but hopefully you'll get the idea. I just wanted to give a sense of kind of the workflow as you navigate through just setting up things. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. So here I'm looking for my file new, and there you can see, for me, it's defaulting to the Tizen native project. This brings up that dialog box. So here's where I was talking about where there's all these sample applications. So there's things like doing HTTP requests. There's stuff to show you things like using NFC. There's things that show you how to use SMS messaging and stuff. So there's some pretty substantial actual application samples in here. So in fact, I think between the web ones and the native ones, there's around 85 sample applications available for you right now. So that's a nice thing. But I'm going to go back and actually just go from scratch and build a form-based application. So you can't see it very well. Some of the other ones, there's an empty application, which is something that's only got a frame. There's a library application. There's ones there's special for OpenGL. So there's a lot of templates for just the bare bones setup, but for standard types of applications in here. And then this is where I was saying you have the selection between either a scene-based one with the scene manager stuff, boilerplate stuff filled in for you, or not. So it defaults to a scene-based one. And then I just give it a project in my name. And you see over here where it popped up and filled everything in. And this is so blurry that I can't read it, so I don't expect you to be able to. I find it really interesting to kind of walk through here. There's a main entry piece of code, and if you're used to kind of C programming, you'll actually see that it looks a lot like the standard main from C programming. And then you can actually trace from there. You can trace and see what's happening with the creation of the first frame and form and everything. So it can be pretty instructive if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. But actually, what I wanted to show you is using the UI builder to get started. So now I just right-clicked on the actual project name up here, and you can see it's bringing up this menu with a ton of entries. You see this one with this nice little icon next to it that kind of stands out, and that's the native UI builder. So this is actually going to run as a separate application. And so what you get here is by default, it's just going to open up that first a view into that first form that I've got. And you see I've got the Hello Tizen and my OK button. So just kind of the default thing is this very simple thing where it's got a header set up for you and a button set up for you already. There's a bit of a bug where it doesn't really show, at least for me, it doesn't show. This is actually supposed to be a view into that. And I think I get it to, if you start clicking around on things, it actually fills it in, but for some reason it doesn't fill it in initially.
Hey, Hard, is the layout done via XML, or is it like, what kind of, like, can we see the code for this, the UI that's generated?
Yeah, so it's going to generate an XML file. So the question is, yeah, it's going to, the layout is how it ends up being defined. It's specified in an XML file, which we could take a look at possibly later. Okay, so quick thing I'm going to do, easy way to create a new form here is just to go over into the resource panel on the side here. You've got a number of the kind of high-level UI container types that are specified there. And in particular, you've got your forms. If you go over to the forms and you right-click there, there's the new form entry. So here I just give it a new ID for one, and then pick a resolution. With the specifiers, you'll see a lot of the specifiers are like ID, some letter, and then underscore. And that's just kind of for ease of naming things. So, you know, IDF or ID form, there's other, you can kind of map what the other IDs some things are. So for consistency, you might just want to keep that naming scheme. So there it's actually created the second form. So now I'm actually going to go down this nice little colorful entry down here, which is the workflow manager. And so you can see that it started out, like I say, you have this special purpose thing, app start, and it's indicating that it's flowing straight to the main form, which was the one that was automatically generated. And now you can see it hasn't filled in anything else yet, but I'm just going to go ahead and draw in my the second form that I added. Now it's interesting, if you look at the source over that's still visible over on the left there, you can't see it, but there's actually been no class files or anything created for this thing yet. As soon as I drag this form over here and drop it, it's actually going to want to go ahead and create that class code so I can start actually manipulating code. So I just kind of use the defaults that are filled in there, and I don't know if you saw it, but you can see it added the CPP file over here for that second form. And I've got it populated over here. So now that I have these two, I can actually go and select, I know it's hard to see, but there's a control down here that's your connector. And now, I really wish this was bigger, I apologize for this. So what it's difficult to see is you've got an action listener that's filled in here, and you'll see that this guy doesn't become active until you, essentially until you're scrolling over something where you've actually got an event listener that can do something to navigate you between scenes. And so I'll scroll over onto that, and then I'm going to go ahead and drag this over and just connect it. And now it's kicking me over automatically back to the code. And what you'll see, if we look at it before, you would have seen that there was just this button code down here. But now what is automatically added in is all of the framework that you need for using the scene manager. So it's getting an instance of the scene manager, and it's filling in the use of this go forward method for you to actually do the navigation to the second scene that I've created. So it just filled all of that in for me automatically. Now if I go back to this guy, so this guy doesn't actually have, any listener on it yet, so I can't do anything with him. So I actually have to go ahead and add an event handler to that. I'm going to go ahead and create. That's not what I want to do. Actually, what I'm going to do is add a button to this guy first. So if I go back to editing my form, and I did not prepare to do this without seeing a thing. Okay, so I'm guessing here, that looks like a button. So just so you can see, all your UI elements are kind of laid out over on the side panel. And again, just drag and drop. And actually, to illustrate a little bit, like I was saying, that a lot of your stuff can be built straight up using the properties. So I can actually define a whole bunch of things about how this button is going to operate strictly from these properties. So you don't have to do it in code. I mean, it'll generate the code automatically, but there's a huge slew of features. Things like colors for things like when you're hovering over the button and when you're pressing and all these sorts of things. And then since I can't see it well enough, I'm not going to try and add. I can actually add the button text that way, or I can do it here. So now that I've got that button in place, I'm actually going to go back and actually I want to add the event handler on the button. So I'm going to add an event handler by right-clicking here. And I'll just give it a simple action ID. I don't know what I just put in, but it's a number. So, okay, so once again, you can't see it up here, but this is the form 2, the second form, and it's actually gone and filled in, created this onActionPerformed method to go along with that listener that I just created. So now with that in place, I can go back. My workflow, you can see now again, as I was mentioning before, I didn't have this dark blue bar in here because I didn't have anything that could actually pay attention to navigation. But now I've added something that can pay attention to navigation, so I'm going to go ahead and connect that. So now, for instance, I can if I connect this up, go. And again, if as before when I had my onActionPerformed, it was empty. Now it's got the scene manager instance creation and the go forward call here. So what I've just created, hold on just a second. What I've just created basically is an infinite loop because you can go from scene, you're going forward and forward and forward and forward and forward between the two scenes. So in a second I'll show going backward. You had a question?
So for the control that you created, you actually vetted and filled a particular action ID, some number.
Yeah, right.
You check at that time whether there's already a number, similar number declared similar, or can you have conflicts?
You can have conflicts. I think that's why I was saying that you really want to kind of think about, start certain things with 1,000, start other things with 2,000, kind of keep them separate that way. I think it's the easiest thing. So now actually, the thing is with this is that I didn't really want to go, I don't want to keep going forward between these things. I actually want to be able to be navigating forward and backward. So I can actually select this guy. And down here in the properties is where I've got a property that's defining whether it's forward or backward. There's actually 3 possibilities here. There's navigating forward. So when you navigate forward, you're always going to specify what scene you're going to. When you navigate backward, you actually have the option of navigating backward to a specific scene. So you can have this effect where your scenes are kind of stacking up, and you can actually jump back somewhere in the stack and skip going backward over all these other intervening scenes. Or you can simply have it go do a simple back navigation where it'll basically peel things off of that stack. And I can actually set that and you can see now, again, you probably can't see now, but it automatically filled in the code and changed it from the forward navigation to the backward navigation. Okay, so I'm actually getting kind of down on time, so that was a really quick kind of introduction to walking you through to setting up an application. Nice thing is that gets you all the framework. Like I said, now you can have a chance to kind of go through and start tracing through the code and see how a lot of this stuff is functioning, and it'll give you an idea of how to use some of the navigation capabilities. Excuse me. So that's basically your kind of Tizen Hello World with a little bit more showing you how to do something a little bit more complicated. So just to kind of finish out here, I'll talk a little bit about the debugging. There's a bunch of macros for debugging support for logging. So you have a bunch of different sort of log levels. You can have things like this, log if, so checking some condition statement and producing things. So a lot of that standard stuff. And then, when you run your application, you'll get all the log stuff generated. And again, it's a special purpose panel in Eclipse that'll show you that. And you can do a bunch of filtering and all that based on your log levels and such. So debugging, you basically have all of the capabilities that you'd expect. I don't really want to go into this a whole lot, but things like setting up. So you actually want it to run it in debugging mode instead of just running as a normal application. But then you'll get this debug view where you can do things like look at do memory examination, look at expressions. You can set breakpoints. Do things like looking at thread counts and all of this stuff. So finally, I'll just end with a couple tips. The Tizen documentation at this point is really quite extensive. There's tutorials, there's API reference stuff. There's all the sample applications. So I really encourage people to go take a look at the Tizen website, developer.tizen.org, and it's actually a lot to read. So kind of dive into that. Sample applications, like I mentioned. And this is actually quite a bit more, I think, than was in 2.1. If I remember right, in 2.1 there were about 60-something, and now they're up to 80-something examples. So last thing I'll talk about, a few things. So the actual application itself is so everything when you load the SDK is you get to name it yourself, but the default is Tizen SDK. You look under IDE, and that's where your Tizen IDE, that's the actual Eclipse instance that you're going to run. We already talked about the setting up the security profile. One thing that, because I've been programming C for too long and haven't been paying attention to the standards, is this element prefix that shows up all over the place. So Tizen's basically uses Unicode. And so, generally speaking, in order to generate the right kind of string, you want to prefix all your string constants with this L prefix. So the next two, these are the two last things. So everybody wake up. Because these are the two really important things that I want to finish out with. There is this end tag that you'll see on certain methods that is extremely important to pay attention to. It's capital N on things. What that's telling you is that that method is either, if it's a method you're calling, it's going to return you memory that you're then responsible for. So there's no automatic garbage collection or anything like that like you're used to in Java. You have to do your memory handling yourself. And that N is a designator to tell you when to expect that you're being handed a block of memory that you have to pay attention to. So you'll see it's like method name ending in capital N. So the method names are all mixed case typically, so it'll stand out. I mean, there's this kind of weird capital N at the end of things. That's basically a text signal to you. So that's why it's important to do, because if you don't realize what it's there for, and you'll just be leaking memory left and right. And it's kind of unfortunate. I mean, it's nice that it's short, so you're not like extending your method name by something huge, but at the same time, it's kind of not really obvious what it's there for. And then the other thing I mentioned briefly is that to kind of keep the runtime system slimmed down for Tizen, they actually decided not to support exception handling. This is kind of a big deal, as you might think. It is and it isn't. I mean, basically, the only place that it really causes problems, I mean, you can do standard, error reporting and stuff with normal method calls just by looking at return values and, techniques like that. Where it runs you into potential problems is when you're doing instantiation of objects. So the problem is now is that you actually have no way of trapping an exception when the construction of an object fails, right? So instead, what Tizen supports is this idea of a two-phase construction of an object. So what that means for you is that in your normal constructor for an object, you never want to do anything that has any possibility of failing. So typically what that's going to restrict you to is mostly just initializing variables that are part of the object itself. So like within your object construction, if you've got a member object, something else, you don't want to try and create an instance of that object and attach it to your the object that you're constructing in the middle of your constructor, because that could blow up and you have no way of handling that. Just as one example. So instead, you want to set it to like a null pointer, and then what's going to happen is kind of the standard is to have this second method called construct. And so you'll do a two-phase thing where you instantiate your object with a call to new, and then you'll finish off, excuse me, You'll finish off the initialization of your object in this construct method, and that's where you can actually do your error detection and return a result from that to tell whether or not you succeeded in finishing the construction of the object. So that's actually a big difference from standard C++ that you need to pay attention to. One slightly nasty thing is there are a couple of places, like in forms, it's really the kind of high-level objects that you don't have to pay much attention to, so it's not a big deal, but there's one or two places where it uses initializing instead of construct, which is an annoying inconsistency. But for the main part, you'll see these show up in code that's filled in automatically by some of the things, and you'll want to use this yourself. And then for people who use Macs like me, the other thing is that you actually need command line tool packages because they contain some of the tools that are actually used by Eclipse on the command line because Eclipse is basically just a giant shell that's actually running a bunch of command line tools underneath the hood to build everything for you. And that's it. Welcome to the world of Tizen.
So, you guys have written your own
No, it's actually GCC, but it doesn't have the. I mean, you can do that without supporting the exception handling. So the question was whether we're building our own compiler. It's actually, they're all, as far as I've seen, they're pretty much all open source tools, things like GCC under the hood. Question?
I have a question for this application and the core, preloaded core application. It seems they're not using Flame or Chrome. So where can I have this idea how they format? And secondly, how I can import that kind of project into my ID?
So the core project, I didn't quite get the question.
Yeah, the core preloaded in the platform source code.
Right.
There's some preloaded applications, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems they're not using Flame or Chrome.
Oh, they're not using frame reform.
And that's first question. And second question is how I can import this kind of project into my ID. That way I can modify it later.
So the pre-built ones, I don't know if they supply the source for those. I mean, some of those are.
The platform source code, yes.
You're talking about so there's a bunch of, I mean, you can see when you bring up the emulator that there's a bunch of applications. That's what you're talking about, the applications that are.
No, I think that's the platform source code.
Certain applications?
Yes. Platform under the apps, there is a source code for applications, preloaded applications.
Oh, so, yeah, I haven't looked at those, so I don't know whether they're formatted in a way that you can just, I mean, you can usually import stuff like that into Eclipse if you look, when you create a new project. Have you tried that? Yeah, I haven't tried that, so I don't. Any other questions? Move on. Yeah, so we're going to have somebody actually talk about web next. In fact, we'll have Stuart.
Well, we're going to do pizza next.
Yep,
Oh,
right now.
oh, I've been holding up from food. I'm sorry.
That's all right. So just quickly, how the rest of the night is going to go is we're going to go ahead and have pizza. Let's try and make this a short break to give you more coding time later. Just get some pizza and a drink and come back to your place. We will be doing, we'll have one more technical presentation, and then if anybody wants Teams, we can do presentation.